This episode of the Feed Podcast is brought to you by the Chicago French Market. The market offers fresh ingredients for cooking at home, delicious grab-and-go options for any meal of the day, or even a simple picnic or office party.
The Chicago French Market, a taste of Europe in the heart of the Midwest.
This episode of the Feed Podcast is brought to you by Oscar's Mexican Seafood. With 5 locations throughout the San Diego area, Oscar's focuses on Baja-style fish tacos, fresh ceviches, and hearty seafood burritos.
And all their salsas and agua frescas made on site every day. They'll even cater. For more information, oscarsmexicanseafood.com.
The Feed Podcast is brought to you in part by United Healthcare. A lot of people think insurance companies are all the same, if they think of them at all.
Oh, I think of them all the time when I'm paying my bills.
Oh, well, yeah, of course. When you pay that check every month.
The copay also, that's kind of annoying.
It is.
But United Healthcare is different. They offer a range of unique programs, things like Real Appeal, a weight loss program for a full year at no additional cost to your employees. And how does a $0 copay sound?
Fabulous.
That sounds really good.
Amazing.
I'm paying like $25 right now. If you see your primary care physician, that could be an option too. More information, go to uhc.com/benefits.
You're listening to The Feed Podcast. Get the inside scoop by following us on Twitter at The Feed Podcast.
When we started this podcast about 3 years or so ago, there were maybe a dozen or so shows focused on food. Today, wow. I mean,
it's every day it seems like I hear of another podcast.
You look at iTunes
food.
And you're like, seriously?
Yeah, right.
A show that just talks about cheese from France or an Alsace that made by monks, but it's like it's so specific now.
Well, I have to say the technology is right there for us, so anybody can pretty much make a podcast. I don't know what the content of all those is, but it is kind of crazy.
There is really crazy. Well, coming up on today's show, we realize we are not the only game in town, or in the country for that matter, so we're introducing you to some other food-focused podcasts you might want to keep on your radar, including a pair of James Beard Award winners, besides us. Stay with us. There is potentially a lot more to make you hungry just sitting there in the iTunes store. This is the Feed Podcast. I'm Steve Dolinsky, a food and travel reporter at ABC 7 News, the Chicago Tribune, and Canada's Globe and Mail.
And I'm Rick Bayless, the chef and owner of Chicago's Frontera Grill, Topolobampo, Choco, Leña Brava, and host of Public Television's Mexico, One Plate at a Time.
And every week, the Feed takes a deep dive into the world of professional chefs, restaurateurs, food artisans, and drink experts, sharing their stories and uncovering their passion for food and drink. But that's not all. Rick and I are always traveling the globe for our jobs, eating, drinking, and immersing ourselves in the local culture. And if we find something exciting along the way, there's a good chance it's going to find its way here to our James Beard Award-winning podcast. Spilled milk, cherry bomb radio, burnt toast, the sporkful. It seems like there is a podcast these days for pretty much every niche interest. I find myself downloading 1 or 2 random shows after I've listened to this one, of course.
Of course,
just to hear what the other pros and amateurs are up to these days. And it really is interesting. I mean, as you said, all kinds of production values, levels, experience, everything from, of course, the New York Times and the national people to little mom and pop, somewhere in the suburbs who just wants to talk about strawberries.
And sometimes they're fascinating. It's really fun to listen to people just sharing their passion about things. The production values may not be super high, but they could be fun.
And we wanted to hear from a trio of other food podcasts today. And as you may or may not know, the Feed won the James Beard Award for Best Podcast in 2015, the first year there was a podcast category. Well, today we're going to hear from the Beard winners in 2016 and this year, as well as another show we think you might want to check out.
Our first guest today is the founder of the Southern Foodways Alliance, a prolific writer and documenter of Southern Experience. He's also the host of Gravy, a podcast that is produced by the SFA. The show won the James Beard Award for Best Podcast last year. John T. Edge, welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Thank y'all.
It's really nice to have you here. So let's talk a little bit about what led you guys into doing a podcast. What about the medium do you like the best?
Well, it ties to some of what y'all were saying in opening remarks. It's a very democratic medium, and it allows, for a small nonprofit like ours, it allows us to tell rich, complicated, nuanced stories of our region in a really efficient way. We tell these stories as a reported podcast, as opposed to really two kinds. There's the kind of conversation between hosts who share experiences and bring in guests. And then there's the type we do, wherein we send out reporters into the field, and they will write a 3,000 or 4,000 word script. We edit it down, and then they record. And that, which is a pretty big investment for a small nonprofit like the Southern Foodways Alliance, yes. The kind of scales of a podcast and the shareability of a podcast make it possible.
So you're kind of the This American Life of food podcasts.
You said that I didn't. I'd love for people to think about us that way.
It is tough to send people out, though, to go produce something, because that takes time and money.
Yeah,
it does. And, Tina Antolini, who was the first host of our podcast, came to us with a wealth of experience and kind of showed us the way. And now that idea of sending out a reporter really becomes impactful, because just this week we sent out a reporter to Houston to tell a story of the hurricane, its impact, and recovery through the world of food. So we, in a partnership, actually we started with Eater because we wanted to get some extra money in this reporter's pocket going into a really tough situation. But we've had a reporter on the ground there for 4 days in Houston telling stories of Vietnamese shrimpers and their recovery from the storm, chefs who have stepped in to feed Houston. So it can be a quick response medium as well. No matter what, for us, it's important to tell stories from those places as opposed to a perch beyond.
Go ahead.
But like I would have guessed that out of that experience of 4 days on the ground there, you get 25 minutes worth of tape. Is that what you're going for? Are you going for more tape than that?
In this case, we'll go for more, but traditionally, 4 days on the ground would yield 25 minutes of tape. Our podcast is 20 to 30 usually. Yeah. In this case, I think we'll end up with 2 to 3 stories. They may be stories we have to follow later and send and go back to Houston to complete them. But this is a rich moment and a terrible moment as well, and I think a good bit will.
On a happier note, one of the recent stories or shows I heard was about these women in Atlanta in a synagogue creating or recreating or carrying on a tradition from their Sephardic heritage, making, is it burekas?
Yeah, burekas. Comes from the Turkish word burek, which means pie. And Susan Capilouto, who's in Atlanta, she forged this story, told the story of this congregation and this pie that was very much a part of their culture, their way of telling stories of their place.
And we've got a recent excerpt from that show, so let's take a listen.
Grace is stooped over several skillets full of onions sizzling on the massive 8-burner stove. There are some younger women here today, but Grace is clearly in charge.
Somebody needs to open up tomato sauce. Sam, do we have tomato puree or sauce hands? I was married 59 years, and since I got married, I always came to help. So, wait a minute, 59 and 3, 62 years.
She's making a savory pie filling with a recipe that hasn't changed since her mom's generation. Today, the women in this kitchen will saute 40 pounds of ground beef from a local kosher butcher, boil 8 cups of rice, pull apart 10 bushels of parsley, and chop 20 pounds of onions. Ann Benader is the president of the Sisterhood, this group of women that gets together for social events and to cook. These women have been doing so for over 60 years. Today, Anne, who is also Grace's daughter-in-law, is chopping the onions.
We just got a continuous feed food processor, so it cuts around, those onions, it cuts around 45 minutes off the process.
And my eyes.
I know, my eyes are killing.
As the women here work steadily, they catch up with each other. Despite the lighthearted chit-chat, this is a major production. The ground beef filling will end up inside small pies that are one of the synagogue's biggest fundraisers. They're known as burekas. They're sold frozen by the dozen in 5 varieties. Besides meat, there's potato, rice, spinach, and eggplant. Prices range from $18 to $25 a dozen, depending on the filling. People from across Atlanta, including Jews from other synagogues, order them year-round through the Orva Shalom office. Since they're frozen, there's no shipping. These burecas must be picked up.
We need oil and a pitcher.
And just very interesting because, of course, pies, people think of pies
Right.
from the South, but very different pies. These are really Mediterranean pies.
I would guess also that when people say Southern Foodways Alliance, everybody's thinking of one kind of Southern food, but you guys tackle a wide variety of food. It just happens to be food that you can get in the South, right?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that read, Rick, 'cause that's certainly our intent, is that, the South in geographic size is comparable to Western Europe. This is a sprawling place of many peoples, and one of the things that's deeply important to the Southern Foodways Alliance is in telling stories about the American South, to tell these rich, complicated, nuanced, multicultural stories of this place, because that's what this place looks like. And yet, to your point, so many people want to frame the South as this kind of bulwark of tradition, this place where change never shows on the doorstep. And in fact, the South over the last 2 generations has been a very dynamic place. And it's that dynamism this podcast attempts to capture.
So we're going to have more information on our website, how to find the link to Gravy. But the show, again, is called Gravy. It's a podcast from the Southern Foodways Alliance. John T. Edge, thanks so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you. This is great, and you have a great podcast.
Well, so do y'all, and thank you for the interest.
All right,
Thank
take
you.
care. Coming up, we'll meet the host and executive producer of the podcast that won this year's James Beard Award and learn more about her show based in the Pacific Northwest. Then later, the new host of The Splendid Table checks in. We'll talk to former New York Times Magazine columnist Francis Lamb. So stay with us.
Arrive at the meal late? Check out previous episodes, get recipes from ingredient challenges, and see behind-the-scenes pictures at thefeedpodcast.com.
Commuters have known this for some time, but over in the West Loop at the Ogilvy Transportation Center, there are more than 30 specialty vendors just waiting to feed you inside the Chicago French Market.
The market offers fresh ingredients for cooking at home, delicious grab-and-go options for any meal of the day, or even a simple picnic or office party.
My name is Mike Ferrazzulo. My brother and I started a meatball concept. We call it polpetti. It means meatball in Italian. You could pick pasta, risotto, a meatball sub, a panini, or a salad. Or just your meatballs in a cup if you just want the protein.
Have you seen the lines, by the way, over at the Aloha Poke over there? And there's like the Aloha Poke, there's a line, and then there's Fumare Meats, and then there's, well, as you just heard the vendor, I mean, there's so much going on right now in that market. There's quite a lot to eat.
That's very exciting. I got to go over there and have some poke.
They've got 2 entrances, 131 North Clinton and 118 North Canal. And how about this? Covered parking is free for an hour with a $20 purchase.
Wow, that's great. They're open Monday to Saturday. You can also grab a bite and surf the internet since Wi-Fi is free. The Chicago French Market, a taste of Europe in the heart of the Midwest.
What are fish tacos? Like, how would you describe a fish taco?
My favorite fish tacos are inspired by the fish tacos in Baja. Usually there, the fish is dipped in a tempura-like batter and fried, and then they got all these delicious toppings that go on them. It's
Crema, there's cabbage.
Crema, cabbage, hot sauce.
Avocado?
They can be avocado. Some people put them, some people don't. But I have to say, it's the stuff that dreams are made out of.
They are. I've done that trip. The next best thing in the U.S. is in San Diego. It's called Oscar's Mexican Seafood. They started out as a food truck in Tijuana, became a tiny shack in Pacific Beach just north of San Diego. Now they've got 5 locations in and around the city, including the latest in Encinitas. Everything's fresh, never frozen, and they make their salsas and agua frescas fresh on site each day. More information, visit oscarsmexicanseafood.com. How crazy is it to think you can actually have your insurance company pay you to walk?
What?
Yes, they're going to pay you to walk. United Healthcare isn't crazy. They just want you to be healthy.
One of their new programs is called United Healthcare Motion, where members can earn more than $1,000 a year toward their health reimbursement account or health savings account just for walking.
I didn't even know I had a health savings account or a reimbursement account, but that would be a good thing.
It would be.
How do $0 copays sound?
Absolutely fabulous.
That would be nice.
Yeah.
That's a nice advancement in society. Or pharmacy experience that offers more flexibility and less disruption.
Well, if your company works with United Healthcare, ask your friendly HR person about their programs, and if not, go tell them to switch today.
I'm going to tell mine. Call 877-233-2059 or go to uhc.com/benefits to get more information.
United Healthcare, a proud supporter of the Illinois Restaurant Association and committed to your good health.
Arrive at the meal late? Check out previous episodes, get recipes from ingredient challenges, and see behind-the-scenes pictures at thefeedpodcast.com.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. We're introducing you to some other food-related podcasts today. For our second segment, we welcome the host and executive producer of The Four Top, a show presented by Oregon Public Broadcasting. Catherine Cole is a wine writer, author of 4 books on wine, and the former wine columnist for The Oregonian. Catherine, welcome to the feed.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me on the show. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much.
And congrats on winning the award this year.
Yes.
Do you remember which show you submitted?
I think that we submitted sort of a mishmash. I believe that it was just a time period of tape that we put together. So I think it was a combination. But we had only produced 8 shows in 2016. We didn't even start till mid-September 2016. So we were completely shocked. I didn't even attend the award ceremony.
Oh, no. All right, well, for folks who haven't heard it, how do you describe The Four Top?
Yeah.
It's a roundtable discussion of the hot button topics in food and beverage. And we get journalists, typically editors, cookbook authors, filmmakers, people who are observers of the food industry, to get together and just have a discussion like they're sitting around the dining room table together, just kind of chit-chatting about issues that people who care about food want to be up to date on.
But you tend to veer a lot into, well, I will say sort of political kinds of discussions from the ones that I have listened to. Maybe it's the ones that I gravitated to listen to, but it feels to me that is sort of your little niche, if you will.
Well, yeah, I felt like, part of the reason I started the show was I wanted to listen to a show that was answering the questions I had, and I just couldn't find that show. So I thought, all right, well, I guess I'll have to invent it. But yeah, I just, when I think about food and beverage, I think so much about issues of sustainability and human rights and culture. And I find that a lot of media coverage of food and beverage, while it's wonderful, it's more about, hey, this is a great recipe or a great chef or a great restaurant. Obviously, it's wonderful to celebrate all aspects of food and beverage, but I want to know kind of where it comes from, why, what people are getting worked up about, and what I need to know, So
you had a recent show with a couple of other critics, local folks who've been writing for quite a while, talking about kind of restaurant criticism, but also kind of new ways of making reservations in restaurants. So, I mean, as a journalist, I, of course, gravitated to that one. Is that something that you got a lot of response on?
So that was one of the ones where I feel like I'm like airing my dirty laundry here, but that was one of the shows where I had restaurant owners and chefs asking, why did you have journalists on there? Why didn't you have chefs? And this is a perennial question we get.
I was thinking exactly the same thing while I was listening to it. I have to say that it's like, where is the balance here? Where is the chef or restaurateur perspective? Please answer the question.
Yeah, well, the whole concept of the show was that it would be like Washington Week or like the NPR podcast, where it's really just a bunch of people who observe the industry getting together and chit-chatting, and there are plenty of shows with chefs on them, and I think they're fabulous, but I felt like there wasn't an arena for those of us whose job it is to just kind of observe and analyze the industry to get together and talk. So it's simply, this is a forum for those people.
We have an excerpt from that show, so we're going to just play a little snippet of it right now.
It's a matter of knowing the standards, and I think a lot of the time a review fails when it doesn't understand the standards of its readers.
I totally agree.
I was interviewing Karen Brooks, and I'm probably going to... Carrie Brooks being the James Beard 2017 award winner for Restaurant Critic, and she's also the food critic for the Portland Monthly Magazine. And she just writes phenomenal reviews. And she was at one point saying that Portland will rise to the fine dining level when it gets a clientele that demands excellence. And that's knowing, I think, the standards of your readers. And where you start failing is obviously when you start sounding like you're behind the curve and you're trying to review a restaurant from old standards and your readers are like, man, I love pork tendon.
Well, is that why that review of the Olive Garden by Marilyn Haggerty, the woman who's now, I think, 90 years old, she's from North Dakota, I think, is that why that went viral? Because it was so clearly behind the times?
Maybe. You know, I haven't read that, unfortunately, but I would say that it nails that thing where half your readers hate something and the other half are like, I like this, and they both want to know what's being said about it.
I think it raises an interesting question about the relation of the review to the nature, to the kind of restaurant it is. You get good reviews of bad restaurants and good restaurants, and vice versa. I think that review of a chain, of kind of pretty mediocre chain restaurant could be a wonderful review if it does something about the nature of nostalgia or retro eating. She didn't, because she just takes it so literally. And I don't, you don't have any sense, as you said, Matt, about standards. You didn't have any sense that woman had standards. She just liked it. I mean, it was very personal and subjective, but it wasn't as if she put it in a context that broadened the reader's understanding of where the Olive Garden fits into contemporary American cuisine.
So yeah, you were saying that you just prefer having people sitting around the table, observers of the industry, as opposed to having chefs on all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I love shows that have chefs on them, but there are plenty of those, and I wanted to do something different that wasn't being done. Also, within the food and beverage industry, I think on that particular episode, one of our panelists said there's more food writing than ever before, and food writers are being paid less than ever before. And it is true that we're in this weird place right now where food journalists are literally starving. So I want to do whatever I can to support people who are committed to food and beverage journalism, because it is not a career that has a lot of payoffs financially, although, of course, it's enjoyable to cover food and beverage.
So you're saying in that market, even, because it's not New York City, it's not Chicago or Los Angeles, but in your market, you've got a lot of activity in terms of people covering and writing about food.
Yeah, Portland is a place that nationally known food and beverage journalists gravitate to, and a lot of them live here because it's a relatively inexpensive place to live. But we also have a food and beverage scene that's unparalleled, and so people come here from all over the world to taste our food and drink our many beverages. And because we have Powell's Bookstore, which is a very well-known bookstore, typically anyone who writes a big cookbook comes through Portland. So I haven't had any trouble getting really interesting panelists. So that's been good.
It's where young people go to retire, as Fred Armisen once famously said, I think. Right?
Yes. And in fact, the thing about that show, Portlandia, is all of it's true.
Oh, wow.
I love you. I love the fact you said that.
With the chickens? What's the story of how the chicken was fed and what was raised?
It's all spot on. I mean, I have seen everything. I laugh at every episode, but it's all taken from reality, from Portland reality.
Well, that's great. Well, the show, again, is called The Four Top. You can listen to it, obviously, from iTunes. We're going to have a link to it on our website. But again, Catherine Cole, thanks so much for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks for having me on.
When we come back, we'll meet the man replacing Lynn Rossetto Kasper on the Splendid Table and talk about that challenge. So stay with us.
Looking for a little extra side dish? Let us know on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at The Feed Podcast.
Commuters have known this for some time, but over in the West Loop at the Ogilvy Transportation Center, there are more than 30 specialty vendors just waiting to feed you inside the Chicago French Market.
The market offers fresh ingredients for cooking at home, delicious grab-and-go options for any meal of the day, or even a simple picnic or office party.
Hi, this is Liz, and this is Lolly and Pops at the French Market. We're all about candies, chocolate, international, and truffles. If you come here, you'll see a beautiful display of truffles and marzipan. We have everything from vegan to nut-free. We can entertain everybody's taste buds.
Have you seen the lines, by the way, over at the Aloha Poke over there? And there's like the Aloha Poke, there's a line, and then there's Fumare Meats, and then there's, well, as you just heard the vendor, I mean, there's so much going on right now in that market. There's quite a lot to eat.
That's very exciting. I got to go over there and have some poke.
They've got two entrances, 131 North Clinton and 118 North Canal. And how about this? Covered parking is free for an hour with a $20 purchase.
Wow, that's great. They're open Monday to Saturday. You can also grab a bite and surf the internet since Wi-Fi is free. The Chicago French Market, a taste of Europe in the heart of the Midwest.
Hey, Rick, I got a question. Like, how would you describe a fish taco?
My favorite fish tacos are inspired by the fish tacos in Baja. Usually there, the fish is dipped in a like tempura-like batter and fried, and then they got all these delicious toppings that go on them. It's
crema. There's cabbage.
Crema, cabbage, hot sauce,
avocado.
They can be avocado. Some people put them, some people don't. But I have to say, it's the stuff that dreams are made out.
They are. I've done that trip. The next best thing in the U.S. is in San Diego. It's called Oscar's Mexican Seafood. They started out as a food truck in Tijuana, became a tiny shack in Pacific Beach just north of San Diego. Now they've got 5 locations in and around the city, including the latest in Encinitas. Everything's fresh, never frozen, and they make their salsas and agua frescas fresh on site each day. More information, visit oscarsmexicanseafood.com. How crazy is it to think you can actually have your insurance company pay you to walk?
What?
Yes, they're going to pay you to walk. United Healthcare isn't crazy. They just want you to be healthy.
One of their new programs is called United Healthcare Motion, where members can earn more than $1,000 a year toward their health reimbursement account or health savings account just for walking.
I didn't even know I had a health savings account or a reimbursement account, but that would be a good thing. How do $0 copays sound?
Absolutely fabulous.
That would be nice. That's a nice advancement in society. Or pharmacy experience that offers more flexibility and less disruption.
Well, if your company works with United Healthcare, ask your friendly HR person about their programs, and if not, go tell them to switch today.
I'm going to tell mine. Call 877-233-2059 or go to uhc.com/benefits to get more information.
United Healthcare, a proud supporter of the Illinois Restaurant Association and committed to your good health.
Get the inside scoop by following us on Twitter @TheFeedPodcast.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. For our final segment today, we welcome Frances Lam, the former New York Times Magazine columnist and book editor, recently took over for Lynn Rossetto Kasper at the Splendid Table. They just had a send-off last week at the Fitzgerald Theater in St. Paul, honoring Lynn's contributions to the program these past 2 decades. The show is primarily a radio program presented by American Public Media, but of course, like all things audio these days, there is a podcast as well, and Frances Lam joins us now. Frances, welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Hey, gentlemen, how are you?
We're great.
Well, I cannot think of a person that I think is more different than Lynn Rossetto Kasper than you. So how was it to try to slide into that chair and host that show? Because you bring so many different aspects of knowledge, experience, thoughts to it. Tell me how it was. When they made that announcement that you were going to take over for her, I thought, this is a crazy thing. I can't imagine you sliding into that chair.
Well, thank you for your kind comments, Jeff. I think, in a very real way, you can't just sort of slide into that chair, right?
No.
Because this is a show that has 20 years of legacy. It's got 20 years of listenership. People who love the show. I remember the first time I heard the show, I was essentially a kid. I mean, I was in my 20s, but that was a long time ago, and to think, hey, you can flip the switch one day and show up and just quote unquote take over, I think doesn't do the show justice, doesn't do Lynn justice, and frankly wouldn't do the listeners justice, and let alone whatever the heck I'm trying to do. So I think what I have tried to do in the few months that I've been working on this is think about what has made the show so wonderful and such an important part of people's lives. And And yeah, maybe that's overstating. Maybe it's not important, but a part of people's lives. For some people, they love that ritual of getting up on a Saturday or Sunday morning and making breakfast for their family and hearing someone talk about cuisines from around the world and maybe talk a little bit about technique and then talk a little bit about, what's interesting about this idea that's bubbling up in the food world. And for other people, it's really simply the fact of Lynn's warmth and her generosity of spirit within their interviews and with the callers and how you feel connected to her as a listener. And I thought, okay, what can I do that does that, but, through my eyes and through my voice? And knowing that I'll never replace her in that way. I'll never become her. I'll never be your, the favorite aunt you never really had. But hopefully I can be, your cousin that you never knew you wanted.
So knowing that, did you and the producers have a discussion about how are we going to sort of put this in your voice or take this in a new direction, or so we're going to keep the segments kind of the same? How do you discuss that in taking this over?
Yeah, it's funny because I think, I approach it with a real sense of humility because I was a fan of the show and because, for all the reasons I just talked about, like I'm not a, hey, I'm in charge now kind of guy. That's not ever been my approach. And so interestingly, it was the producers who said to me, no, really, we need to make it your show. I'm like, well, what do you mean? I just want to be able to do this thing and not have people turn the thing off. And they said, no, well, the show can only be great if it's a reflection truly of the host's interest and the host's passion and the host's personality. So, what that means for us is going to continue to evolve. It's evolved a little bit already, but I think, this year I started, I think my first show was maybe in March or April, I forget exactly. And so for the bulk of this year, Lynn and I have been trading shows every other week. So it doesn't make sense to do something crazy and then, the next week come back to the way the shows people have known it. So you don't want to create an experience that feels jarring. And so it's been nice. It's been a nice long runway for us to really get the handle of it, for me to practice my voice, honestly, in some ways even literally, just learning how to talk for the radio, to talk for the show. It's all a matter of practice. And, hey, Lynn did this for 20 years, bless her, and I hope to be doing it for that many myself. So we take it as hey, let's take it show by show. Let's try to get a little better show by show, and we'll see how it evolves.
Well, we're talking about podcasts today, and one of the things that I love about the medium of a podcast is that I can put my earbuds in and I can be in the middle of a conversation or overhearing a conversation. It's a very intimate way of overhearing a conversation, and what I've loved about Lynn for so long is exactly what you pointed out, that she's interested in everybody. She puts everybody at ease. Having been interviewed by her a number of times, I always so looked forward to those interviews because they were fun. And I've noticed that you, in your own way, are doing that same thing. So it's intriguing to me that is what you guys are focusing on, is trying to create the same kind of feeling, because you are different people, different generations, have different experiences growing up, obviously. But there's something about being able to put people that are good cooks or writers at ease and drawing out of them that stuff that makes them really special.
And I want to listen a little bit. We got an interview that you did with Jacques Pepin recently, speaking of different generations and talking to people, making them feel comfortable. So let's take a little listen from your interview with Jacques Pepin recently.
Chef, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So I noticed in your new book, the very first recipe is for a simple roast chicken. No brining, no spicing, just a hot pan and a hot oven. And so let me ask you, why is a simple roast chicken such an iconic dish for French chefs?
For different reasons. It's like, an hard-cooked egg, something that there is no recovery if you don't do it right. Of course, the quality of the chicken is very, very important. The quality of the pan that you cook it in. You cook that with a thin stainless steel pan, and the heat transfer is bad. So the juice which comes out and crystallizes in the bottom of the pan, that's what we call the glaze. Well, with a stainless steel pan, the glaze burns. The quality of the pan, the quality of the chicken, piece of butter, and of course a hot oven, that's all important.
I love hearing you say this because it's one of the things that I learned in cooking school and also continue to learn, not just in cooking, but also in life. And that's the more seemingly simple something is, the more you learn to see the different details that really matter that maybe you didn't even realize would have mattered before. Like you said, the quality of the pan actually really matters. But so what separates in your mind a good cook from a great one?
First, for me, you start with technique, because the technique, that is the manipulation, the manual dexterity of a chef, for me is important. You have to become a technician first, whether you're a shoemaker or a cabinet maker or a surgeon for that matter, or a cook, you have to know your trade. Or whether you're a painter, I paint too. You can spend 2 years in art school and learn how to mix yellow and blue and to make green with that and do something with your thumb or with a spatula or with a brush. And after 2 years, you can stand in front of a landscape and do one painting after another. Does that make you an artist? Not really, but at that level, you're a good technician. If you happen to have talent, however, then the technique themselves make you show that talent much better.
And so, Francis, for you, it must be just a thrill, obviously, to spend some time talking to people as opposed to just having a couple of column inches to write the piece in the New York Times Magazine, which is a great venue, but this is a lot different.
And we do miss it. I have to say,
I miss it too.
I really, really loved your columns in the New York Times Magazine. And when the announcement was made that you were going to be transitioning over to this, I thought, those were the ones that I always wanted to make sure that I read.
Oh, well, thank you. I miss it too. But, it's interesting because I feel like in that column, so I wrote this column and really what I did there was I tried to center on the column was about cooking with different immigrant families from different countries and different communities. So every month, one month I might be with an Italian family, and 1 month I might be with a Palestinian family, and 1 month I might be, with a Korean family, so on and so forth. And always through that column, what I tried to do, and really in a lot of my writing, what I tried to do, what I kind of feel like is my highest calling as a writer, is to help tell the stories of invisible people. And to help, because when you talk to someone, when you interview someone, it's like they're giving you a gift. They're giving you a piece of themselves. They're giving you maybe the most important thing in the world, which is their story. And for me, I always felt like, as a writer, that's not my source, right? That's not just some anonymous person that I get a quote from to make my story a little bit better. I feel like that moment is such a gift that they're giving you. It requires such generosity and trust and vulnerability on their part that the best thing I can do is to try to hold that story up and bring it out to the world in a way that feels true to them, feels true to that moment and true to that spirit of generosity. Okay. And on the radio or in audio, it's almost like you're doing that so much more directly. Let's not lie to ourselves. We, as an interviewer, certainly you gentlemen know this, you're doing this show. You know the questions you want to ask. You kind of have a sense of where the conversation might go or where you want to help drive the conversation. It's never, it's a sort of invisible collaboration, right? Like all conversations are. But to have people speak in their voice to your audience is, to me, feels like an extension of that, and one that feels maybe even more direct.
We're looking forward to hearing a lot more from you. Good luck on this new endeavor. And again, we're going to have a link to the show on our website. The show, again, is called The Splendid Table. Francis Lam, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to talk to you guys.
Coming up next week, a full show with the man behind Momofuku.
instead of trying to create new product, we wanted to really understand what people have been doing with food to make it delicious. And that really led us down a rabbit hole where I actually had to study things that I didn't really pay attention to in school. And had I learned it in school, I probably would have been a better cook because of it.
We'll talk with David Chang, the chef and driving force behind the Momofuku restaurant, as well as a new fried chicken shop, a food delivery service, and of course, one of the pillars of the recently departed Lucky Peach magazine. I have a feeling we'll spend a fair amount of time talking fermentation. That's next week on the show.
Remember, you can always contact us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at The Feed Podcast, or check out our ingredient challenges, get recipes and other information about previous shows by simply visiting our website, thefeedpodcast.com. And don't forget to subscribe and rate our show on iTunes. Be sure to follow me at Rick_Bayless.
And I'm at Steve Dolinsky. You can find us in the Apple Podcast section. We're also on SoundCloud, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. Man, we're everywhere. More information about all the podcasts we talked about today on our website as well. I produced today's show. Linnea Dominic's our intern. Max Dolinsky supervised today's music. Bureaucratic wrote and performed our theme song. And the Feed Podcast is edited by Matt Cunningham at Truthful Enthusiasm. Whether you're an individual or institution, get your story online with truthfulenthusiasm.com. Thanks for listening, everybody.